Names scramble. Time gets slippery. My brain feels bruised black. I don't know when, where, or even who I am. But I do know this. I'm an expert on pain. Today on the Comic Book Report, Benjamin Percy's Wolverine, hardcover, Volume 1. Stick around and check it out. Greetings, bub. My name is Dominic, and you're tuning in to the Comic Book Report, where we review comic books and graphic novels so you can get an idea of what to read. And today we're taking a look at the Dawn of X era Wolverine. Like I'm sure many of you, Wolverine is a favorite character of mine, and after House of X Powers of 10, I couldn't wait to see what his solo series would be like in this Dawn of X era. So let's go ahead and dive in with today's review. First, some quick facts about today's collection. The issues in this volume were written by Benjamin Percy and penciled by Adam Kubert. The issues in this volume were published by Marvel Comics beginning in 2020. The volume itself collects Wolverine issues 1 through 5 and 8 through 12. This oversized hardcover comes in at 336 pages. At this time, I'd like to issue a brief spoiler warning. I will be flipping through the contents of today's collection and commenting on plot points throughout. You've been advised. Okay, and here's our first look at that Wolverine oversized hardcover edition. Formatting-wise, this is very similar to a lot of the Dawn of X era oversized hardcovers. I've already reviewed a couple from my channel, including the Marauders, Excalibur, and X-Force, and so this one is just the next on my list. But like the others, it's a minimalist design aesthetic with some cover art that is indicative of the art you can expect in the collection. Each of these volumes also favors a color. This one's kind of a red, and also you can just tell from the design, a lot of the books in Dawn of X have this kind of look. And now I'll go ahead and give you another look at the dust jacket before proceeding to show you what the actual hardcover itself looks like. As I mentioned previously, this is an oversized edition, and it does include glossy print pages. I really like the production value on these sets. However, I would have preferred some Dawn of X or even some of these titles as omnibus format. Who knows, maybe in the future we'll see some of that trickle in. At the time of the recording, we still only have the Hickman X-Men omnibus. You can see that hardback itself has the Wolverine stylized logo broken up, similar to the X-Force book I reviewed. Now let's go ahead and transition to take a quick look at the binding of this book. You can see it there. It does appear to be a bit of sewn binding. There is a little bit of gutter loss, though. You can even see from this page, and I'm sure you'll see it throughout. It's not my favorite, but the gutter loss isn't too bad. It's, once I push down a little bit, I don't feel like I'm losing out on too much, but I want to make sure all the collectors out there can take a look at what you can expect. And with all the formatting notes out of the way, it's time to dive into the collection proper. Now, this is an interesting collection. Like a lot of these other Dawn of X era books, this book does not include the Wolverine X of Swords tie-in issues. I believe that's issues 6 and 7. Those issues are included in the X of Swords event, which you could see reviewed on the channel as well. But for those wondering, I don't consider those issues essential reading when you're reading this book. That meaning that I don't think you have to go out and buy X of Swords to feel like you can read Wolverine's full story. Those two issues largely revolve around Wolverine trying to find a mythical sword for him to compete in the X of Swords tournament, and it's unrelated to the plot lines before and after in this book. There is a brief mention of X of Swords, post those issues in this collection, but you're not going to be missing anything, and you can read this more or less as one cohesive book. As far as the storylines present in this book, I would say overall there are maybe two main stories that kind of blend into each other a little bit. Those first one being the Pale Girl story arc. There's basically this kind of bluish ghost-like, I think she's a mutant entity that can kind of possess people and mess with people's minds. And in the early issue, Wolverine kind of realizes he's murdered like his best friends. He has no memory. He doesn't really know who he is. He's super disoriented and confused. And from there, we kind of back up around, we kind of unraveled this mystery of this kind of weird mutant girl that can kind of manipulate minds and kind of possess people. It's a really interesting story arc. It has Wolverine teaming up with a federal agent who's a human to kind of try to take this mutant down. Fun moment that happens here. Wolverine uses Magneto's helmet to eventually stop any kind of psychic interference. And anyway, really fun couple issue story arc there. You definitely are started with action, tension, and just gravity as Wolverine's surrounded by his dead comrades. Luckily, this is the dawn of X era, where resurrection is kind of a normal part of the day-to-day life on Krakoa. After that, the story transitions into the Re-Emergence of Omega Red, a longtime foe of Wolverine and the X-Men. He comes to Krakoa, which pushes Wolverine to the limits as far as the banner forgiveness policy on the island, the amnesty. And Omega Red seems to be involved with a kind of vampiric plot that's happening around the world as factions and tribes of vampires are coming, all under the power of Dracula, to try to make a rival nation state like Krakoa. And so there's a lot in this book about Wolverine versus vampires. And that was something I didn't know when I first purchased this volume, but something I was so happy to find out as I was reading. Wolverine becomes a lot more involved with these vampire groups after they find out that his blood and healing factor allows them to temporarily walk in the daylight. So Wolverine's kind of a key piece of their plan. So of course Wolverine is embroiled in a lot of vampiric battles throughout this quest. I really like seeing what they did with that. There's also an issue or two that have him back in Madripoor. He kind of tries to infiltrate a secret evil auction underground in Madripoor. Of course, he comes dressed as Patch for longtime fans of Wolverine's solo work. I loved seeing Patch again in this Dawn of X era. It was a whole lot of fun. The auction itself was interesting as to why Wolverine was there and ultimately what happens with all of that. But I'll let you go ahead and read for more details yourselves. As far as the art, I always felt like it really enriched the story. It never took anything away from me. I think I loved as well the color palette we saw in a lot of this book, between the cool colors and the pale girl arc with a lot of the snow, things like that, juxtaposed with a lot of the reds we see with the Omega Red and the vampire stories. A lot of beautiful colors, rich, detailed artwork. It is on the kind of cartoony side of comic book artwork. Not too bad, but it leans a little bit more on that spectrum than, let's say, the X-Force artwork I reviewed a couple months ago. But overall, really satisfied with the art. It was thoroughly consistent throughout, and like I said, it only enriched the story and never took away from it. And while I'm talking about X-Force, I wanted to bring up that someone told me that I shouldn't read Wolverine without first reading Benjamin Percy's X-Force run. And I see why they say that, as Wolverine kind of logically comes out of that X-Force run, but I don't think it's a prerequisite. Meaning, if you just want to start the Wolverine solo series, I think you can do so without reading any of the Benjamin Percy X-Force run. However, reading a lot of that run as well, it gave me a better context for the X-Force when Wolverine overlaps with them in this book, and you do see some similarities with Benjamin Percy's narrative style and voice. However, something I think is an absolute plus to this collection is the way that Percy nails Wolverine's internal monologue. This is something I've seen since the early days of his solo work, the kind of rich interior monologue of Wolverine. And we see that in full force in this Wolverine hardcover collection. And it felt authentically Wolverine to me. I think for me, this was pitch perfect Wolverine character with a pretty good set of storylines. They're by no means groundbreaking to me. I don't feel like this was genre-breaking, best of a generation stories in this book, but they were some really fun, globe-trotting Wolverine adventures. But I think that the character's voice was pitch perfect, and I am absolutely planning on reading further into this run. One thing I'd like to note about this collection as well, there is a parental advisory, like the X-Force collection before it. This Wolverine title can be, at times, pretty bloody. As far as I can tell, outside of the violence and maybe a tiny bit of language, there wasn't a ton of other adult content in this book, no real sexual situations that I recall, or anything like that. But it is a pretty violent book. But I suppose a degree of that is to be expected when your main character has knives that can protrude from his hands. As we make our way through this collection as well, I want to note again that while I don't think that issue 6 and 7, the X of Sword tie-in issues, are needed to enjoy this collection, I'm a little bit mystified, as I am in a lot of the other cases, why they weren't just included in these individual books. I think they would have only been additive to the experience, and I think especially with Wolverine's issues, they wouldn't have pulled you out, because there is an episodic nature to some of the storytelling in this book. What I mean by that is there are 2 to 3 issue little mini stories in this collection, so I think why not have the 2 X of Swords issues just smashed right in here? You could have enjoyed seeing those issues of him trying to retrieve the sword, things like that. Maybe include a page that had a little blurb about the context of X of Swords and what happened, and then we felt like we could have a full little run of issues here without having that weird gap. But the choices were made as they were, and we're still treated to a really beautiful collection here. As far as what you should read before reading this collection, I don't know that anything is completely necessary. Like all these other Dawn of X titles, I do highly recommend the House of X Powers of 10. That's that mini maxi series that really kicked off this whole Krakoa Dawn of X era of the X books. This is what established the Krakoa nation state for the mutants and kind of positioned them as a world, just global, political, socioeconomic superpower in the world of the Marvel Universe. And that's really the framework in which all these stories take place. But for that being said, since Wolverine's stories are ultimately very globe-trotting and kind of disconnected from a lot of the other X-Men happenings, I feel like you could almost read this book even without reading that. I don't think any other story is explicitly necessary, but if you want to enrich the experience, definitely read House of X Powers of 10, and maybe even the beginnings of X-Force by Benjamin Percy. But overall, really, if you just wanted to enjoy a good Wolverine book, I feel like you could just pick this off the stands with very little homework or prerequisite reading and really enjoy what you read here. Overall, a really fun read that I really hope to continue. There's, like I said, 2 or 3 main little story arcs in this book, the third of which culminates in a really good climax at the end of this that, while the story isn't definitively finished, I feel like it's a satisfactory ending to a book 1. But I, for one, am eager to continue Benjamin Percy's run on Wolverine. And now that we've covered a lot of at-the-glance reviews of this Wolverine book, I want to spend a little bit just talking about specific moments in this collection I thoroughly enjoyed. I think first and foremost, the fact that a large portion of this book was Wolverine battling vampires was a huge plus for me. I love classic monsters, and I'm always really curious how they implement vampires within the Marvel Universe, and this definitely didn't disappoint. We got a little bit of Dracula, but we got a lot of these other little factions and underlings within the vampire culture as well. There's even an issue that has some teenagers that are all vampires who are kind of trying to fight the vampiric order and voice and just be kids who just happen to be undead vampires. Just absolutely really well done, and something I really liked throughout. I also thought the way that they connected Wolverine to the vampire's overall plan and plot by considering his blood and his healing factor as a way to promote their own interests and power, I thought that was really cleverly written and obvious in some ways, but I love that they're going this way, and it's a good way to give him a lot of really coherent stakes into what happens with the vampire world. I think another feature I really liked is just to see Wolverine's interest and feelings towards Krakoa grow and evolve throughout a lot of this Dawn of X era. I think that overall his standing is that he's pretty wary about Krakoa. He thinks that, if it's too safe and too easy, people get soft or people lose vigilance, and that's something he's not going to do, which ultimately is why he's such a big part of X-Force and does a lot of these violent, more Black Ops kind of missions, is to kind of try to secure the safety of that nation state. But I think what's interesting is toward the end of this Wolverine collection, we can really see moments where you could just tell he loves having a homeland. He loves having a mutant nation that is his. And you really see that when he goes ahead and liberates one of his friends from an auction house. I think the character's name was Maverick. He talks about trying to get him to go to Krakoa. And Maverick has a whole sequence talking to him about, like, oh no, did you drink the Kool-Aid? Are you in the Krakoa cult, so to speak? And Wolverine is just sort of like, I like it there. And I think it's so telling to see how much, even though, he doesn't trust kind of the lack of safety measures and he's maybe wary about the future of Krakoa as a whole, you still do see that he really loves feeling like deep down him and his people have a true home in Krakoa. And I think in a lot of ways it advances the Krakoa era storytelling to see what having a real nation, what having a real home means to a lot of these dearly loved characters who have been the outcasts for so long, to now be their own superpower in the global economy, politics, everything, to have a home and a root. I just think it's really fun to see, and you definitely see little tells throughout this book for just how much Wolverine does actually really love Krakoa. And I wasn't sure how much I was going to see that, since most of this book he's not even on Krakoa, but out in the world having all these adventures and, violent escapades. At any rate, there was a lot to love about this collection, and now that we're finishing up on the extras here, we're about done with the first Wolverine hardcover collection from Benjamin Percy. And now I think all that's left is to give this collection a grade. For a collection of above-average Wolverine solo stories that perfectly capture the voice of this incredible character, the Comic Book Report is happy to give Wolverine by Benjamin Percy, hardcover, Volume 1, a B. This was an absolute blast. I had middle to low expectations for this series, and wow, were they exceeded. I think overall I might still prefer the X-Force run, just for my money, but I think that this was an absolutely wonderful place to start a solo series for Wolverine within the Krakoa Dawn of X world. I will read more. Let me know what you think in the comments below. And until next time, this has been the Comic Book Report. Please don't forget to leave a like, a comment, and please check out some of my other videos on your way out. Until next time, have a good one.